meeting tonight that she had to. So, Adrian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for
Thank you very
having
much,
me.
and please join me.
So let me start with saying that
Yes, please.
taking this seat after Brett Stevens is either act of bravery or craziness. But I'll give it a try. Consider me a bonus track for something that was really interesting, and it's not going to be on a playlist in any radio station, but hopefully if you give it a try, it's going to be interesting.
I need not elaborate on my love and admiration for Adrian. He and his wife are regulars at our home for Shabbat dinners. I consider him a true friend of the Jewish community, the Jewish people. I have thanked his government many times publicly for their strong support of Israel. I'm well aware of the fact that there are some disagreements between the Jewish community and the government of Poland. That happens among friends. Some of them are serious disagreements. That's also fine. What is certainly true is that the Polish is three things. Number one, the Polish government and the Polish people protect the Jewish community in Poland, and they are completely safe, which is saying a lot in Europe these days. I walk around Poland with a yarmulke. I fear nothing, thank God. Number two, the commitment of the Polish people and the Polish government to the preservation of the Holocaust sites is unparalleled. Number three, their support for Israel. When I just said to Brett Stevens, were you shocked about what happened when you saw anti-Semitism rising in Brussels, which is the capital of the EU? He immediately said, no, because it was Europe, I was not shocked. So to see Poland's support for Israel means a great deal. And I hope that you especially communicate to Prime Minister Morawiecki how much we appreciate, and to President Duda, how much we appreciate their leadership, their friendship with the Jewish community. So Adrian, thank you for being here. Let's begin with my book. Now I get to talk actually about my book. This book takes place mostly in your country, on the soil of Poland. And let's begin with things that are a little bit controversial.
I expected that.
Yeah, when President Obama said in 2012, I'm not sure he meant it, maybe he wasn't really focused at the time, but when he said Polish concentration camps, the Polish people got very offended, understandably, because there were never any Polish concentration camps. There were Nazi German concentration camps on Polish soil. And this led, of course, to a Holocaust law that would lead to some friction with the Jewish community. And I told the people in the Jewish community at the time, listen, I disagree with the Polish Holocaust law, and I challenged it. But I said, but I understand the people of Poland. Germany invades Poland, brutalizes them on the 1st of September 1939. The Lubavitcher Rebbe's father-in-law describes a first-hand account of what it was like being in Warsaw during the bombardment. He was there. Millions of course, 3 million Polish Jews are murdered, 90% of the Polish Jewish community, and millions of non-Jewish Poles are murdered. Are there Polish collaborators with the Nazis? Yes. There's a debate on the numbers. But we all know how much Poland suffered under the Nazis, and it was Germany who perpetrated the Holocaust. And I guess, as obvious as it is for me to say that it was Germany who perpetrated the Holocaust, maybe Poland feels, whenever Jews speak about like a Polish Holocaust, what is it that you don't get? That it's such an absurdity, maybe the way the Jews feel when Israel is equated with Hamas. Do you see what I'm saying? Is there the same sense of outrage? Is that maybe what has led to some of the pushback on the part of Poland when it comes to that kind of language being used?
Well, first of all, we understand so many issues better than any other nation, the issues that are right now attached, the problems that are valid right now for the Jewish people and for the Jewish nation, for several reasons. You presented the book, and the book is filled up with the not with the names, but with the number, the exact number of the Jewish people who perished in the Holocaust. Actually, we could have the same book, because Poland also lost around 6 million their citizens. Among them, 6 million were Jews, but they were Polish citizens. So we've been through the war, and also as a nation and as a country, probably hit the most after Jewish people.
At the pain of death. You would be murdered instantly if you were hiding a Jew.
Exactly. you reminded all of us this unfortunate statement made by President Obama. Unfortunately, this is not the isolated incident. It happens pretty much every week that we find in a newspaper, on the radio station. Even recently, Mr. Cohen in CNN interview said about the Polish death camps, and it happens all the time, very frequently.
Polish death camps.
Exactly. And coming to your book, because we of course get very upset. We know, and everyone who studied the history of the Holocaust knows that there was no such a thing as a Polish death camp. Poland and Polish people never established death camps, nor in Poland or nor any other places. But coming to your book, I think that this is very this is a great metaphor here. I don't know if it was the plan on purpose or not, but you describe your trip to Poland with your family, and we will talk about it later, I understand. This trip starts in Germany and ends in Germany. Is that correct?
That is correct.
It goes through many sites in Poland, and as you said, majority of this book describes some sites in Poland, but it starts in Germany and ends in Germany. And I think this is something that captures actually very much this position of Poland in this entire history, that has been Poland has been invaded by Germans. The Second World War started in Poland by the invasion of German people. As you said, Polish people were brutalized by Germans. They were slaughtered by Germans, and were surrounders of what Germans did on Polish soil, including Shoah. And that has to be remembered. That has to be remembered, that Poland had nothing to do with this entire industry of Holocaust that has been placed in Poland for many reasons actually, but never in collaboration with Poland as a state or as a nation. And there is a huge distinction, by the way, to be made and to be remembered, that obviously there were people, individuals who made the wrong choices for different reasons. Some people who collaborated, but Poland as a nation and Poland as a state fought in the same fight against Germans who were perpetrators.
See, this is a very important point to make, because before I even talk about my book, there are bridges I want to build in my life. There have always been bridges between the Black and Jewish communities. I started on that in my early 20s when Cory Booker and he and I would later, as you can see in our New York Times, that we would disagree about the Iran deal because it involved genocidal threats against the Jewish people. But there were bridges I've always wanted to build. I wanted to build bridges between the Black and Jewish communities. I wanted to build bridges between Jews and Muslims. I wanted to build bridges between the Jews and the evangelical and Catholic communities. And I always wanted to build bridges between the Jewish people and the Polish nation. Not only because my grandfather is from Poland, but because I always felt that both communities had very poor communication when both had suffered so tremendously in the greatest barbarism the world had ever seen. And how is it that its two foremost victims would not be able to communicate? Because Hitler hated the Jews more than anything. They were absolutely his number one target. Even when you look at Greetings from Auschwitz on the cover of this book, 1.1 million people die at Auschwitz, which is a German word, by the way. Of course, the Polish word is Auschwitz. 1.1 million die, and 1 million are Jewish. 100,000 are Poles, many of them Catholics and Christians and Polish political dissidents. So the Jews were absolutely his number one target. But his second biggest target was Poland. Of course, he hated Stalin, but he made a deal with Stalin. That's how the Second World War started. We kind of don't want to remember that. We don't want to remember that the Soviet Union and Stalin did a deal to split Poland in half, and that Stalin invades September 17th, 2.5 weeks after Hitler. But Hitler hated the Poles. He hated the Slavs. He wanted to decimate Poland. And when you say that why did the Holocaust take place on Polish soil, one of the reasons was that he abolished Poland's actual existence. And he put one of his great monsters to lead Poland from the Babel Castle in Krakow. But to Poland's credit, unlike France, Poland never, ever collaborates. France becomes a collab. You know, whenever Jews say to me, so many Jews say to me, "Oh, the Poles were just as bad as the Nazis." Oh, the Poles were the Poles helped with the Holocaust. And I look at them and I say to them, "What about France?" I said, "Do you know that France, their greatest military hero, Marshal Pétain, actually became the head of the Vichy government? And they sent 80,000 Jews to their deaths, rounded them up, not the SS. The French police." Poland never did that. We went to the city of Vichy. I had the heebie-jeebies being in Vichy. We were there at Tisha B'Av. Poland had a government in exile in London. They never collapsed. Poland had a home army that fought, and of course Poland rose against the Nazis in the September. That doesn't mean. Let me be fair. That doesn't mean there weren't Poles who collaborated. Every country had people who collaborated. It just means that as a nation, Poland was decimated by the Germans, always resisted the Germans, had a government in exile. So that's why I say I don't understand the miscommunication between the two communities. Poland was eviscerated by the Nazis. Warsaw was flattened. That was Hitler's punishment, as Stalin watched the flattening of Warsaw at the end of 1944. You know, literally, the Red Army watched it. Sorry.
What has to be said, I think that there's so many traces now I have to follow. It's very complex, almost as complex as the history of the Second World War and Poland and what happened there. You said Poland was under occupation, and indeed it was, and it has to be remembered that half of the country was under the Hitler's regime, and the second half under the Stalin. Then, of course, it has changed. The Germans took over the entire country, and that also is causing some still making Polish people upset when we see in Netflix. It was a couple of years ago in some of the series they published. There was a map, the history from the Second World War, the map, and it says Poland. There was no state of Poland at that time. And Hitler decided to establish death camps and this entire machine of exterminating Jews and Gypsies and other nations in Poland for several reasons. One of the reasons was that he wanted to keep it away from his own people, so it's not, so they are not aware that something like that happens. Poland was sort of under the radar and not very closely observed. There was no infrastructure that made it easily recognizable that something's going on in Poland. That's the second reason. The third reason is purely logistic. We had, first of all, majority of the European Jews were living in the Poland and the surrounding countries, so it was sort of easy for them to drag them to the death camps. There was decent infrastructure, railroads and etc. So it was sort of easy to do it in Poland. And that history played also...
And the most Jews were in Poland.
And as I said, the majority of the European Jews were living there. And another thing is that the history, what happened straight after war, I think is something that should be seen as one of the major reasons, to answer your question, why two of the victims cannot get along and have so many discussions and disputes about the history. Why aren't we standing together, standing up actually against any forms of anti-Semitism, lack of tolerance? We should do it on larger scale, more openly, and frankly, most of the discussion and disagreements we have, it should never happen, because we went through the similar history and we were both victims, not the victimizers, Brett said earlier. Why that happened? Because the Iron Curtain came between us. And as simple as that, Poland started to become perceived as the immediately another enemy of the Western civilization that has to be defeated. Not Polish nation, not as much Polish nation as the state of Poland, which was under what we like to say, actually openly, yet another occupation under the Soviet occupation. So naturally, that brought together countries like United States of America and Germany, the country of the perpetrators, but geopolitics has changed, so it had to be sort of expedite reconciliation, including Israel, the newborn state of Israel, that obviously allied with the United States of America, hence also allied with the Germany. And Poland was silent. We didn't have any platform, international platform, to stand up and tell people the story. On the contrary, the government in Poland did every possible effort, made every possible effort to make sure that history, the Second World War, the truth about Poland, about Polish fighters, is erased. And to some extent, they were very successful. They were in Poland for another dozens of years. And when Poland regained again their independence, the Iron Curtain collapsed, and we became new and free democracy, the only peaceful movement, that solidarity movement that led to the change of the entire world. In a way, it was very late to make up for all these years in our history that we couldn't talk. Obviously, there were Jews after the war who were trying to come back to Poland. Imagine that after such a painful few years of a history, devastated country, almost each and every city, the beautiful history and the beautiful architecture, people struggled, and obviously it was a wild country, wild land of people who run wild. It wasn't easy without the support of the government of Poland back then to reconcile and to start this proper discussion on how to live together and how to walk together and tell the story to the world. And obviously now we have years of collaboration, actually great collaboration with the Israeli government. We are a good ally, a very committed ally to the United States of America, to American people, to Jewish people. We want to, after these years, as I said, it's really hard to rebuild, but we want to present Poland as you presented a little bit here in your book. The country went through a lot. It was a site of the Holocaust, but also a victim of the Second World War. And there is, on top of these sites that we really take good care of, and I understand we will be talking about that also, we would like to revive, and we are trying to revive the beautiful and rich history of
Jewish
European Jewry, because Poland, for 1,000 years, there were ups and downs, obviously, but you might consider Poland as the only country that was tolerant, was a safe haven for Jewish people who were expelled from all countries in Western Europe, starting from Spain through all countries of Western Europe, they ended up in Poland. And actually, in the 16th or 17th century, Poland created something that was in the idea something like the European Union, the most tolerant, together with Lithuania, the most tolerant European country you can possibly imagine, with diverse society, with rights actually that were not known anywhere in the world, particularly the Western Europe, very progressive, first constitution was implemented after U.S. Constitution that gave rights to people that were extraordinary given the time that they were implemented. It was the end of the 18th century. And then, obviously, our neighbors were not very happy about it, and Poland got partitioned. And for us, except the little period of time, 20 years between the end of the First World War and the Second World War, we considered Poland to be under occupation of different styles, starting with the first partition of Poland in the late 18th century, really up to 1989, where the communism regime has collapsed.
You know, we could talk for endlessly about these subjects that are of real interest to the Jewish community.
I just wanted to say, coming to your book, more on the book than the history itself, you touched the unique actually subject that I don't know any other book which is written in that matter. That subject is traveling to contemporary Poland.
Traveling to Poland. And what it's like for a Jewish family to travel to Poland.
Travel to Poland. We know that Poland is becoming, it has always been popular among especially Jewish youth. They were taken from their schools.
The March of the Living.
March of the Living and all the trips from Israel to Poland.
Which are non-stop. See, that's what's so interesting. Gosh, I wish I had the time to really elaborate on this, but I want to just get focused. Does everyone here in the room understand that the two sites of Jewish pilgrimage in the entire world are, of course, Israel? But then the second is not Argentina, Buenos Aires, it's not even New York, it's Poland. The March of the Living goes to two countries. It goes to Poland and then it ends up in Israel. But there's a very different orientation in both countries. The Polish part is tragedy. You're there to witness the annihilation of the Jewish people. I've been on March of the Living. Elisha was the keynote speaker right after his father passed away. It's an event like no other. And when I was there, President Duda spoke, President Poland spoke. I'm here talking to the Israeli president comes, the Prime Minister of Israel comes, and 20, 30,000 Jewish kids, high school kids from all over the world. It is a sight to behold. It's nothing like it. Then they fly to Israel. And the idea being, Poland is where we were annihilated, and Israel is where we were reborn. It's a place where the Jews are buried. It's a place where Jews are cremated. I'm thinking to myself, well, the Polish people probably don't like that. They probably feel, wait a second. This country, Poland, produced some of the greatest rabbis that ever lived, like the Ramah synagogue in the second most famous synagogue. The most famous synagogue in all of Europe is in Prague, where my mother-in-law was born the year after the war, 1946. That's the Altanois synagogue. And the second most famous is the Ramah shul in Krakow. And everywhere, and of course Warsaw, the Warsaw Cemetery, the greatest rabbis of all time are all buried there. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, the Poles probably, they look at this and they probably think, this is a little bit weird. Well, no. You guys are treating us only, and so, and this is, Adrian, but this is one of the debates that I had with my kids.
So let me say that. I started with saying that Jews are familiar with going to Poland, obviously. We look at these trips with respect, to be honest with you. As you said, there is they always safeguarded, which is a little bit weird from the Polish standpoint, because there's nothing to be afraid of. There are other places in the world where you can really be afraid of the street kind of anti-Semitism, but rather not Poland. Of course, except isolated incidents which happens everywhere in the world. There are some ignorance and other people who perpetrate that, but Poland overall is a friendly country, not just for Jews, for all people who want to come to Poland. So we observe these trips and we see them coming to Poland. We only look at them with a little bit of regret, which is changing, luckily, recently. But we always looked at them with the regret that they don't have that chance to look a little bit more into the history, immerse into the history of what was in Poland before the war. And I mean, we respect as a country, as a nation, that they want to see all these sites that are in your book for the preserving the memory of the Holocaust. And as I said, Poland, this is really an apple in our eyes to take good care of these places, and you probably experienced that, and many of you as well. But there is so much to see there. And obviously these trips have certain programs. Actually, as a little bit on the side, I can tell you that in my previous life I worked for LOT Polish Airlines, and obviously LOT carries many of. They carry many Jewish groups, and Jewish people use the airline to fly from U.S. and from Israel, and one of our goals, only partially achieved, unfortunately, yet, was to encourage the organizers to expand these trips to see something else of Poland, not just Holocaust. You know how these trips look like. They go to the site, they visit the site, then they're locked in a hotel, receive some kosher catering. They have no chance to see Poland as a country. And here it comes I think the major point, that history put Poland in probably the toughest spot that you can possibly imagine. The spot of a country that is the country of the greatest pain and suffering of the nation, of the individuals, actually. As you said on your trip, that you discovered the name in the book. It's not just, it's in your book, that the 6 million is just a number, but individuals have their relation to what had the most personal relation you can possibly think of. They have this relation which is associated with Poland. And even if people understand that Polish people had nothing to do with that as on the nation scale, that's what creates the pain, is the association with Poland. So the anger is also the association, very natural association with Poland.
That's a very fair point.
In your book, what struck me, one of the things that struck me in your book the most is when some of the people you talked to before you going on that trip said, "I'll never go to Poland. I have no intention, and my children will not go to Poland." And this is something that this is very regrettable, and this is something we would like to change, because as much as we understand it's difficult to face it, there is also this beauty part of Poland where you can see how the Jewish culture is preserved and actually is reviving, and it's becoming very popular among Jews and non-Jews, which is also in your book. And yes, your daughter was upset that the Jewish restaurant in Krakow has no kosher food, but this is changing.
Yeah, no, I battled my kids. See, in the book it's also a Holocaust history, but that's not what it is primarily. It's primarily a story of what it was like to take my kids to these places and how they thought their father was crazy, that I had like lost my mind. Who would take their 8-year-old to Auschwitz? I remember calling one of my friends saying, "Hey, you want your kids to come with us?" He said, "Shmuley, you're insane. I'm not going to participate in your insanity." And so many of the debates I had to have with my kids, and a lot of them were about Poland, Adrian. A lot of them about Poland. So every year, the Jewish community doesn't even know this. Every year in Krakow, with the exception of last year and COVID, Krakow has the Poland Jewish Festival. I'm sure no one even heard of this. The Polish Jewish Festival is 10,000 Catholic, non-Jewish Poles who come to celebrate Jewish life in Krakow. Now, there are some Jews as well, and they bring musical acts from Israel, but by and large, these are Polish non-Jews who want to discover a disappeared, I hate the word race, there's only one human race, but a disappeared ethnicity. Some of my kids loved it, some of my kids were horrified. I thought it was beautiful. I wanted to soak in the entire, I said, this is amazing that 10,000 non-Jewish Poles, many of whom have never met a Jew in their life, they know the Jews were annihilated, they want to recreate Jewish klezmer music and Israeli music and kosher food or kosher style food. And we had the largest Shabbos kosher dinner since the Holocaust in Poland, and I spoke at that dinner, what a great honor, with Rabbi Shudrich, the chief rabbi of Poland, in Krakow. So I loved it. My wife will have to speak for herself. I think Debbie, but my kids were saying, this is ridiculous. This is Disneyland. There are no Jews. They can't co-opt our culture. First we're killed here, and now they're like co-opting us. And I said to my kids, see, Adrian, what I respect about you, what I respect about Prime Minister Morawiecki, is that instead of freaking out and saying, what the hell, here we are trying to do something good, and now the Jewish community is attacking us, you're fair about it. You're trying to see it from our perspective. You're saying, we understand the pain that Jews automatically associate the Holocaust with the Poles. And you just said that Poland was given the worst possible lot, no pun intended, in history by having the Holocaust and the main death camps take place on Polish soil. So I had to explain to my kids, number one, the Poles did not perpetrate the Holocaust. You got to stop that. The Poles were decimated by Hitler. To the extent that there were collaborators in Poland, there were collaborators in every country, but the Poles did not perpetrate the Holocaust. They were murdered and slaughtered, not to the extent of the Jews, of course, there's no comparison with the Holocaust, but they were murdered, slaughtered, brutalized. Number two, Poland could have done what so many other countries did. Poland could have said, we don't want this association. We don't want to be remembered as where the Jews died. We're not going to rebuild any of the camps. We're going to let Auschwitz fall apart. We're going to let Treblinka fall apart. Listen, the first time I went to Dallas, Texas, do you think I went to see, cowboy hats or the Dallas Cowboys? They're brilliant. First place I went to see was where John F. Kennedy was shot on November 22nd, 1963. And you speak to people in Dallas, say, we don't want that association. We don't want to be the place where Kennedy died. We're a whole city. Nobody wants that association. So Poland could have said, the last thing on earth we want is to preserve Majdanek. The last thing we want is to rebuild Treblinka. We're not going to have signs about the Warsaw Ghetto. But they did all of that. That's where my respect comes from. My respect comes from that they weren't afraid of that horrible association that would have people like my kids saying, everything we've seen sucks. But you know what? By doing that, they actually showed tremendous respect to the 6 billion. Because you have to remember something. We have a very distinguished faculty member of Yad Vashem, Siggy, and I'm really happy that you're here tonight. And I really want to do an event together. And I didn't give enough opportunity up here to thank you for everything you do for the Jewish community in Israel. Siggy is one of the only world-renowned celebrities who leverages her fame to fight for her people day and night and is unashamed. You're a hero. So, but even Yad Vashem, which is an amazing museum, and it's a sacred mountain, it's not where it happened. It's still not where it happened. Auschwitz is where it happened. So on the 27th, and by the way, here I have a little bit of sympathy with the Polish government, even as opposed to the Israeli government. Last year, 2020, January 27th, Israel on January 24th did a 75th commemoration of the 75th of Auschwitz. I didn't go. I go to Israel all the time. I love Israel, but I felt, no, if Poland is going to properly commemorate what happened, we have to go to where it happened, where the Jews actually died. And I went to Poland. And I took my son Mendy with me. And I remember that while I sat there, and I have to say something else. Poland's commemoration of the 75th was really unique. Because aside from President Duda, no Polish official spoke. They really let the survivors speak, and I thought that was a tremendous sign of respect. And as I sat there listening, and by the way, it was the weirdest thing. I had such a strange day because I'm sitting there speaking to Ed Mossberg, who has been given all kinds of important honors from the Polish government, and Auschwitz survivor. And this guy comes over to me and Ed Mossberg, and he says, I'm the king. Do you want to meet the queen? And I'm thinking, who is this? I'm the king, you want to meet the queen? So I have no idea who this was. I said, excuse me, sir, this is a Auschwitz survivor. Why don't you tell him who you are? He said, that's the whole reason I want to. He said, I'm the king of Belgium. And then a few minutes later, I was speaking to the Crown Princess of Sweden. And I said to her, I just came from your country. I said, with all due respect, we in the Jewish community feel not so great about Sweden. we feel that your foreign minister is kind of like an anti-Semite. And she said, oh, that's just the foreign minister. Anyway, she was very gracious, the Crown Princess. But all the European leaders were there, and they all came to Poland. So why does Poland do it, Adrian? Why does Poland preserve the story of the Jewish people who were killed when they don't always get the credit for it? Why do they do it?
That's a great question, actually. One might say, and sometimes we read that it's put in such a context that this sudden need of being friendly to the Jewish people comes from some I don't know, self-interest or there's any kind of interest involved. But the reality is that the only interest is that, first of all, Poland as a nation is very devoted to commemorating any sites that are reminding us of the history. As I said, the history of Poland is very complex. So this is very natural for us. But first and foremost, we considered this history, this part of the history, our own history. Because, as I said, out of 6 million people, there are different calculations, but approximately 6 million people who perished, who were killed, exterminated during the Second World War, the Polish people, 3 million of them, so 500,000 of them was Jewish. And they were Poles, and we consider them Poles. And what they established before the war, before the partition of Poland, and even during, this entire culture, Jewish culture that as I said, found a safe haven and grew actually in Poland. Poland was the heart of the Jewish nation for centuries. We consider that to be a part of a Polish culture. Some of the Jews brought it here to the United States, and this is actually maybe an inappropriate anecdote. But whenever I go to the deli, that's the best Polish food I can get. Because this is exactly what I get from my grandmother.
But it's twice the price.
It's a little bit more expensive. That's another reason why to go to Poland. But see, this seems to be a joke, but it really isn't, because I think that this is we must remember how much we have in common and how we build that through the centuries. Very difficult in different times, and eventually we've been victims to something that was horrible, the most horrible what we can possibly imagine. But we might still go back and see these roots. And when you go to Poland, you can see that we have a beautiful museum in Warsaw, Polish Museum, which is a museum of the history of Polish Jews. And you can see...
It's one of my favorite museums in the world, the Polish Museum of Jewish History in Warsaw, which is from the architecture to the exhibits. It's
you can see how the Polish shtetl looked alike. You can see how that culture was really glowing, and we want to bring it alive. As I said, your daughter was not satisfied with the restaurant, which was not kosher, which is obviously silly to run the Jewish restaurant which is not kosher. But it's not the case anymore, because it's changing literally every year. We have some of you are going to Poland very frequently and can tell. Maybe I'm a representative of a government, but there are people who can testify for that this is in fact changing every year, and you'll see more and more such sites. And also the people. I have to tell you that what strikes me the most and what is really amazing, when I see so many posts on Facebook, on other social media, where I see individuals, not even connected to Jewry or without any Jewish roots, whenever they find matzevas, the graves of the Jews found in the ground, used as bricks or...
Yeah.
Desecrated, basically. they take them out of that, call rabbi with such a respect and honor, and then we rebuild entire cemeteries. I know that the gentlemen are not supposed to discuss money, but I think it's just important to point out that Poland established in 2017 the endowments, sort of a fund to preserve the Jewish sites, the Jewish heritage sites in Poland, in the amount of nearly 30 million US dollars, and then every consecutive year we assign additional 80 million US dollars that are distributed among different NGOs and other organizations who are taking care, preserving different Jewish sites. It's a significant number for a country like Poland, and it shows this devotion, and you can see the great result of it whenever you come to Poland, and whenever you have a chance to jump off that bus that takes you from one side to the other, and see this entire picture of Poland. That's why, coming back to your book, I think that you, for the first time, you took the trip that is...
You are phenomenal at just mentioning my book.
Well,
I owe you
and
a
I have,
lot,
and that has to be stressed out, and I have no interest in that. Thank you so much.
Well, now you do.
A little toast.
Thank you.
No, because I wanted to say that I really praise this book, and I praise the work you have done, and obviously the trip you took, to present the problem or the issue of traveling to Poland, not as a part of the organized group, but as a family trip.
As a family.
Which has a purpose. The purpose is great. The cost of the trip is great to see the sites, but then there are evenings, right? There are some moments of the trip was pretty intense, so not so much, but there are some moments of where you can look around together with your children and see what else. But also, even if you just briefly and very generally look around. What's around, and it's in your book as well, around Auschwitz, around other sites, that there is a life there, and that gives you the picture that Poland for Jews and Poland from the perspective of Jews was not just that, was a place full of life, actually.
And I also talk about...
And you end your book, because obviously to prepare to this book I read the first chapter and the last chapter,
and the summary on
and
Amazon.
and the summary of the Amazon. You beautifully put in the end of the book that eventually, despite this entire discussion, is there a God who actually allowed for something like that happened? We make a choice, and we should choose life. And I think that this is a great summary of how we perceive this trip to Poland should be, eventually on the side of life, because you see the sites and you visit these sites, and it's so painful, it's so personal. I've been to these places, to many other places actually. We had the chance one time, remember, discuss the President Kagame of Rwanda, where I spent 1 month, and I visited the sites that are still have a smell of what happened, the genocide that happened there. And without any comparisons, I just want to say that this is important to experience, this is the real thing. But then we choose life, because eventually we are here. So many people have died, perished. There were attempts to eradicate the entire nation, and including Poland, by the way, because in the long-term strategy was also to overcome Poland as well for the Hitler. But we are here, and we still have this heritage, this beautiful history that should reunite us, which we share, whether we like it or not, by the way. Because again, I mean, tomorrow you will go out for a dinner, and you'll have that actually on your plate. Which is silly, but in fact this is the reality. We share it whether we like it or not. We choose to the life, and Poland chooses the life. Also, both by preserving the sites, by paying such a great attention to be correct with with all the religious law that applies to preserving the sites. We never done anything without proper consultation and involvement to that. But on the other hand, we have these places full of life, beautiful, by the way, and wonderful. Probably one of the best restaurants, kosher restaurants right now in Warsaw, in Krakow, and other places. And by the way, ironically, you filled up the huge gap actually, because there are these trips that are with the buses and well organized, but sort of limited to the Holocaust sites, and there is a very rapidly growing, I'd say, tendency for Jews to come to Poland actually for shopping, for entertainment. Poland was ranked. It was a couple of years ago. It was ranked Warsaw actually, the most frequently visited place among all Jews globally, which is crazy. And the vast majority of these Jews are not coming to see any sites, Holocaust sites. They're coming for shopping, for entertainment, different kind of entertainment, food, whatever they can explore, abandoning basically the Holocaust cause. And you feel up this gap to show that there is a combination. If more people like you decides to take their families to Poland, and it's very comprehensive and it's very complex. It's very difficult actually to expose children to any form of pain and suffering. It's not easy. So on one hand, it's not a holiday, but you can make it a holiday, a actually beautiful and educating holiday, by do this combination.
Yeah, maybe these journeys to the Holocaust that I wrote about will become more common. As we begin to wrap up, because it's hitting 10 o'clock, let me just share two very quick anecdotes. The first is, it wasn't even only in Poland that my kids felt so rebellious against this trip. And a lot of this book is a story of that rebellion. Because I started with 6 kids on the trip, 6 of 9, and within 2 months, 3 had left. They really couldn't take it. And it caused a real rift in our relationship. My older kids, they had to process where I had taken them and whether they felt I had damaged their Jewishness in some way and their attachment to God by showing them an aspect of God that had abandoned the Jews. But it wasn't in Poland. It was actually in Budapest. My daughter Rachalea, who's married to her husband Rabbi Itamar Takli, they live in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, wrote brilliant essays about this journey when she came back and about her anger with me, and I wouldn't relent. I said, I still believe this is this most important trip we ever did in our life. And she finally wrote, after like a year, why she agreed now that it was the most important journey of her life, how it had deepened her, how she couldn't see it at the time. But it was on a Saturday night in Budapest, of all places. And Budapest in the summer is the partying nightclub capital of Europe. I mean, we were walking to like Herzl's birthplace, which is...
Second after Warsaw, by the way.
Second after Warsaw. Yeah. I'm glad you guys have better clubs. It was the strangest thing. Where's Debbie? Is she here? There were women. There were Jewish religious women who had to go to the mikvah in Budapest on Shabbos. You know, the ritual bath of immersion that I talk about in my book Kosher Sex, and they had to cut through lines of thousands of revelers from clubs. The mikvah's in the middle of this giant nightclub scene. It's like crazy. And then the main shul in Budapest, and this is really sad because, as I said, 550,000 Hungarian Jews were killed in 3 months. It was the fastest slaughter of humanity in history until the Rwandan genocide, which exceeded it by 300,000 people. 880,000 died in Rwanda in 3 months, 1994. But so many of them were actually buried on the grounds of a synagogue. Now, there is no shul on earth where Jews are buried. The law is strict in Judaism, completely different to Christianity, Islam, Catholicism. We cannot have any bodies in a shul. Jews separate life and death always. Bodies all have to be buried outside the city. So my good friend Clive will appreciate this. When I was rabbi at Oxford, suddenly they call me up and they say to me, Malden College was doing. Malden College is one of Oxford's distinguished colleges, and at the time it had a Jewish head of college who was very big in the arts, Anthony Smith. Do you remember that name? They called me up and said they're doing an expansion, and they came on all these bones that have to be reinterred because the ancient Jewish cemetery, before the Jews were expelled from Britain in 1290, was right there outside the city walls, and they found all these Jewish bones. We're very careful to bury people outside the synagogues and outside the cities. But in Budapest, they were dying so quickly and being murdered so quickly from hunger, disease, under Eichmann, who personally oversaw their slaughter, that they buried them inside. There are 70,000 Jews, I don't know the exact number, I speak about it in the book, buried in the main shul, the second biggest synagogue in the world. Biggest synagogue in the world is right here. Is it Park Avenue? Where is it? The Temple Emmanuel, right? The Reform Shul, Fifth Avenue. And this is the second biggest in the world. And it's built coincidentally, not intentionally, on Theodore Herzl's birth site. The shul bought his father's home to build the shul, but they're all buried. It's terrible. So my kids said, you know what? We can't even enjoy Europe. It wasn't Poland. It was all of Europe. They couldn't enjoy Europe anymore because Europe just became a place where the Jews were killed and slaughtered, and they decided we don't want to go to Europe anymore. And all of my kids were born in Europe. They were born in Oxford, England. 6 of our 9 children. So Rachalea left, Shana left. They just started, and I begged them to stay. I said, let's finish the trip. We still had to go to all these fun places, Austria and Mauthausen, Sachsenhausen and Vienna, and Hitler's birthplace, Brana am Inn, and all these great places.
Well, frankly, it's been probably a little bit too long.
Yeah, it could be. That's what they said.
The trip. Because I wanted to say this is
But you could write your own book about this.
I guess. This is the great travel book. So when you read it, actually, you can just plan your trip accordingly, except you want to split it into parts.
Yes.
Because it was very intense.
It was extremely intense.
Fully understandable.
Yeah. Why they. Yeah. I still don't forgive them though. Anyway, I want to say one final analogy, and then we'll kind of wrap up. You know, Adrian, I'll tell you something that touched me about the Polish people. So Johnny Daniels took me. There's a place I always wanted to visit, and it's not easy to visit. So Hitler ran the war from 3 places. He ran the war from Berlin, especially the last part. We all know about the bunker, where he blew his brains out. Yimach Shemo, may his name be erased on April 30th, 1945. And then 1/3 of the war he spent in the beauty of the Bavarian Alps, in Obersalzberg, Berchtesgaden. And then the other 1/3 was in Rastenburg, his forward, at the time, Prussian headquarters, which is Poland. I've always wanted to go there. That's the place where von Stauffenberg famously tried to assassinate Hitler on 20 July 1944. I give Tom Cruise so much credit for this. I love his movie Valkyrie. What a shame it never got the attention it deserved. Tom Cruise's incredible movie Valkyrie, where he plays Stauffenberg. And the Polish officials with Johnny arranged for me to go there. You know what touched me about that trip? It's a national park. It's a national historical park. Not easy to visit. It's in the Lake District, right? Beautiful lakes, is that right?
Yep.
And as I got there, all the park rangers, kind of believing that they could create a kosher meal for me, they had cooked all this fish and they had cooked all these vegetables. And I saw how much they wanted me to see this place. They knew what it meant to me as a Jew to see the place where one German almost killed Hitler. Where Hitler, it was only, talk about 4 inches, killed another, I don't know what God wanted. Hitler had bent over a table like this to look over the military plans at his daily conference at 12 o'clock. And because it was such a hot day, his military conference always took place in a bunker. So even one of Stauffenberg's bombs would have killed everyone. In fact, Stauffenberg had 2 bombs, but the second one didn't arm. But unfortunately, they also moved that day's conference into a hut because it was so hot to have fresh air. So the bomb blasted outward. But even that would have killed Hitler. 4 people were killed. But at the last second, Stauffenberg left his briefcase with the bomb, and one of Hitler's generals bent over with Hitler to see the maps, and his boot bumps into the bomb. So he moves it 4 inches. 4 inches was the difference between Hitler living and dying. And he moved it to a giant oak part of the table which absorbed the blast. And Hitler only broke his eardrums. It frayed his pants, so he looked almost like a clown. He walked out with his underwear, but he survived. And 3 hours later, he greeted Mussolini, who had arrived that day. And you know what I remember that day? Adrian, the park rangers, pulled out every stop. They heard a rabbi was coming, probably not very common. I don't think a lot of people even get to visit. It's an amazing place to visit. I can't even describe what it's like. You're talking bunkers that look like giant eggs that are dotted, and Hitler ran the war from there. And the respect they showed me, and they sat, and when I had to kind of explain to them that all of that was for naught, I couldn't even eat it. I said to myself, the sensitivity of these people, that made a mark on me. So on behalf of myself and my wife Debbie, and all of us who engaged on that trip,
The most amazing
very
wife
much.
in the world.
Who has the best taste in men? And
Yes.
yes, Adrian, on behalf of myself and my family, and on behalf of all of those who cherish the memory of the 6 million, I want to thank you as a representative of the government of Poland for everything Poland does so that we could take a Holocaust holiday and go to the places where our people were slaughtered and brutalized, murdered and annihilated by the Germans, by the Nazis, between the years of 1944 and 1945.
One final remark. I promise, and I'm very thankful that you are so courteous to stay along with us. Just a final word. You mentioned in your book two men who escaped Auschwitz and informed U.S. administration about the Holocaust. In fact, the first one with his attempt to do that was Jan Karski. He came to the United States with the entire description of what was happening in Poland in the death camps and with the plan how to actually destroy the railroad tracks in order to stop this and gain some time to actually a proper military action. And President Roosevelt totally denied the words and the entire report. And
Yes.
he
met
came
with
out,
Churchill, right? Oh, he met with yeah.
He came out the White House and the statement he made, he wrote it in his memoir. He said, "I was trying to save millions. I couldn't save the one man." And
he now has a statue outside of.
there is a yes. There is
Outside
a
the consulate,
there is a he has a little bench where you can
Right.
see the statue. But I want to use it as a metaphor that even if we cannot change the entire world and at once within a blink of an eye the problem of the anti-Semitism and lack of tolerance and any this kind of problems that we face, we can do one little step, like the life of a one man which is saved, and this is not just even a little step, but a big step. And I hope that this book is read actually, because it's a great advisory of how to come to Poland and how to perceive Poland with this entire complexity. So I'm very thankful for even if I don't agree with 100% of it. Let's say that I agree with the 80%.
But luckily, Adrian, the 20% you disagree with, thank God you're a diplomat to the United States of America. No, thank God you are a diplomat to the United States of America, which is a democracy like Poland. So you have the right to be wrong.
I guess the truth is that I have to read the missing pages, the pages that I didn't read. That's probably where it comes from. So thank you very much for having me, and I hope it was inspiring.
Ladies and gentlemen, no speech.
Jan Karski came
Yes.
to Yad Vashem.
He's a righteous Gentile. Yeah. Yes.
We honored him. I hosted the ceremony. I sat
You
with
hosted
him.
it.
Yes. And he came and he described his meeting with FDR.
Wow.
He even described the cigar and everything of FDR.
Wow.
And he told us that he was very, very disappointed when he came and told what was happening in Poland to the Jews. And he was disappointed by FDR's response. FDR said, "We'll settle accounts with them after the war." But this is not what Jan Karski came. He came to ask to do something now and not settle accounts after the war when there will be no more Jews
And he had a
left.
plan, very precise
And
plan.
then he said that after the meeting, he also met with Felix Frankfurter, who was a justice on the Supreme Court. And he told Felix Frankfurter what he saw in the Warsaw Ghetto and what he saw, what the Nazis were doing. And Felix Frankfurter said, I think you're telling the truth, but I still don't believe it. It's so horrible, I can't believe it. But I'm not saying
What year was this, Mordechai? What year was this?
that was in 1991, something like that.
That's amazing.
And
He was a professor at North Carolina? Where was he? Georgetown?
He was asked about anti-Semitism, and it's very interesting. He said, anti-Semites are simply sick people. They're sick in their mind. All anti-Semites need to have their heads examined. They are simply psychopathic. That's his explanation of anti-Semitism. He also said that after he came to the United States, he was so disappointed by the lack of response that he decided he was not going to speak about this and so on. He couldn't return to Poland because his cover had been blown, Jankowski. That's not his real name. His real name is, I believe, Kozielewski, right? And he went to Georgetown University and he studied, and he didn't want to have anything to do. Elie Wiesel came to him in 1982.
So obviously he was very humble. He was very humble. He was very humble. Yeah.
Sure, he was very humble. And Elie Wiesel then talked him and asked him to come out and speak again. And we honored him at Yad Vashem. And also at Yad Vashem, we gave him the honorary citizenship of Israel. He was very proud to be an honorary citizen of Israel. And I made sure that his tree was very well kept and watered. I watered this tree several times. And if you go to Yad Vashem, visit this tree. And one of the great persons in Poland who really cared what was happening to the Jews, he wrote a book, it's called The Secret State, in 1944, okay? In which is a whole chapter where he met the leaders of the Jewish ghetto.
And ironically, only this book made this history
You
that
should
he was
read that
reporting
chapter
on
where
so
he
popular
reads
in the
it.
United States. Only
And-
that book, only after that book.
And the Jewish people told him, Mr. Kowski, Hitler will be defeated, Poland will be restored, but we Jews are not going to be there. We Jews are not going to be there. Poland will be there, but we'll be killed. So you got to do something. Go out and alert the world. He was in England. He didn't meet with Churchill.
He met with the foreign minister, right? He met
with Anthony Eden.
Anthony
And we know what Anthony Eden was. He didn't give a damn about this. But then he went to Washington and he insisted that he wanted to meet FDR. And the Polish ambassador arranged it. And it was not easy to meet with Roosevelt in 1943. He was the big leader of the free world, but Roosevelt didn't meet with him. But as I said before, he was very disappointed.
Yeah, but Ben Hecht knew what was going on, and Ben Hecht, as you know, organized demonstrations about what was going on.
Ben Hecht is
And
another
Ben Hecht, as you know, was blocked from meeting FDR by Stephen Wise, who said, I don't want you meeting with these types of Jews. And Ben Hecht, with Orthodox rabbis, chained themselves in front of the White House, and Ben Hecht and those like him of his ilk were screaming from the rooftops to be thwarted by Jews like Stephen Wise. You know that's the history.
Well, Phil, let me just say this. You know what? What we've seen tonight is how many other discussions we have to have about this. And I believe with all my heart that the 6 million listen to us. And I watched them overlooking Pest from Buddha, and we were at this beautiful, and I purposely took them out that night in the hope that they'd calm down and maybe have a fun time. And I listened to this debate, and it's maybe the most important story in the book. So Rachel Leah says to me, Baba says to me, Tati, why did you bring me here? I just went to seminary in Israel for a year. You know, you wasted your money. You wasted a year of my life sending me there. In Israel, I found a living God. I found a living people. I found the IDF. I found yeshivas. I found a home. I found a family. I've come now to Europe and I've seen a Jewish cemetery. I've seen a God who abandons, who forgets, who witnessed this all and did nothing. And I'm so angry at God. Why? So suddenly Shana says to Rachel Leah, and they're a year apart, and they grew up sharing a room. Shana says to Rachalea, Baba, we did not come here to get closer to God. We came here to remember the 6 million, no matter how distant we grow from God. We are here for the 6 million because they want to be remembered. And I believe with all my heart the 6 million want to be remembered. So many of the Holocaust testimonials of people who were murdered actually ended by saying, remember, Gedank, remember what was done to us. They want to be remembered. And I wrote this book to them and to Debbie's great uncle, Soli Wiesner, 22 years old. It's hard to believe. My wife's own great uncle, my mother-in-law's uncle, murdered in Auschwitz when he was 22 years old. Siggy, because you're such a great fighter for our people, would you like to give it the vote of thanks?
I would like to know how much the book is, please. I'm not kidding.
It's $30.
Okay, I would like to buy 3, please, right now. Okay. I'm excited about reading the book, and I want to thank you so much because when we went to.
But I have nothing from.
Well, no, you're not getting a percentage. I would have given you a percentage.
0.
But when we went to the 75th liberation of Auschwitz, I went to Auschwitz with a heavy heart, and I remember sitting on the plane with my mother, and my father, and my husband. And my 4 kids begging me to come, and I said, no, it's not for you right now. You're going to go on the March of Living. And as we went to Poland, and I heard my father speaking, and he held seminars, and he was meeting with this one, and everybody had a fancy title, and it was amazing. My father said, you know what, we're going to take a break. And I said, where are we going to go? I want to show you Poland. And I have to tell you, everything about Poland, from having a heavy heart, turned into, wow, the people of Poland are so beautiful. The restaurants are amazing. I remember him taking us to a restaurant. I'm not kosher. I'm sorry, Elohim. Toda, slicha. And in the restaurant, there was a band. And I said, can you play something? They said, sure. I said, what do you like to go? I said, my mother loves Fiddler on the Roof. And all of a sudden they were singing, if I was a rich man, yabba dabba. The people of Poland are so beautiful. We went shopping, we ate in all the restaurants, and I walked away with, wow. And my father said, you see? You see, because we always have to find the positive in every negative. We can't, and I said to my dad, Dad, how do you do this? How do you take testimonials? My father's a walking encyclopedia. He knows who they are, where they came from, what country they were saved, how many people. He's the smartest man. He not only speaks 7 languages, and he grew up in an Orthodox community in Borough Park. And I said, Father, how? And he goes, because righteous Gentiles. When you go to a righteous Gentile, say, why? Why did you risk yourself and do what you did? Your family could have been killed. He says, you know what their response is? Because I'm a human being and it was the right thing to do. And these are the people, this is why we must remember the 6 million and the 20 million who lost their lives. But we have to remember there is good in the world. There is, and we're living now in backwards times, and we're living now where evil is ahead, and everything, you know, the robber of the bank keeps on going in and robbing the bank, and nobody understands why no one's stopping him. But remember, there is a God up there. Never lose hope. And like my father said, find the good in people. Don't lose faith in the Jewish people or in humanity itself. Thank you for coming, because this is
Everything, every single word she said about Poland is true, actually.
It is.
So,
It is.
amazing.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to sign books downstairs. We're going to come and sign them right now.